This is a test to see if this is working. This is January 10th interview with Senator Lana Oleen. Okay, we're here to make a taped oral interview, and I'm going to begin by asking you how long have you served in the Kansas legislature, for what years?
Okay. I was elected to a 4-year term in 1987 and have completed 2 years of that 4-year term.
Okay, and you're in the Senate, and you're a Republican. Why do you affiliate with the Republican Party?
Well, it goes back to actually my parents are Republican and Democrat. I was born in Missouri, and in Missouri you are a Democrat. So I sort of had the exposure to both sides growing up. However, when I moved to Manhattan, a good friend of mine was running for Congress, and he was a Republican, so I began to help him and got involved in the local party as a precinct person, and then vice chairman, and then chairman. And
now, where was this?
This was all in Raleigh County.
All here, right here.
Right.
Okay. How long then have you been affiliated with the Republican Party?
That would have been as a registered Republican since 1977.
Okay.
Before that, I was unaffiliated.
Okay. Can you describe your first election or appointment? How did you run for office? What were some of the strategies and techniques you used? And what helped you get elected?
Okay. The first office that I ever ran was for the Senate. I've never been elected to anything else other than within the party, making that bid for vice chairman and then chairman. But there are many people, particularly in the Senate, who have a background of city commission or school board or county commissioner or something, but I don't have that particular either background or baggage with mine. But simply as chairman of the Republican Party in this county, part of my responsibility was to identify candidates for office. And for one reason or another, people were not willing to run for the Senate, so I quit my job in Topeka and ran.
Oh, that's interesting. What type of an election campaign did you run? Was it a door-to-door, person-to-person?
It was a very grassroots campaign in that the year that I ran, I was the only senator who filed for office by petition rather than paying the filing fee. And I have 7 communities that I represent, and I made certain to go to each one of those 7 to gather signatures so that it truly would be representative of the entire district.
Did you have, in this election, did you have primary opposition? Or?
No, I had no primary opposition. There was discussion of putting of someone else running, but that person, once they found that my intent was to file within a few days, decided that he was not going to run against me, so there was no opposition. However, in the general campaign, the person that I ran against had already run for this office 4 years before. And of the nearly 16,000 votes cast in that office, he had lost by 17 votes against a 6-year incumbent. So everyone knew that it was going to be tough sledding once that person announced he was going to try again, because he had already had the exposure at the district level.
You were active in the party, and you say you couldn't find someone to run from the Republican Party. Was there any other reason why you decided to run? Had you thought about this for a while and said, well, if the time was right, or just...
No, really. I have been a classroom teacher in Pottawatomie County for a number of years, and then had accepted an appointment in the Hayden administration with the Department of Human Resources, and I was commuting to Topeka. And in that position for a year, I also served as a liaison with the department to the legislature. Through my volunteer years, Republican politics, I knew a lot of the legislators and was able to see what it was like firsthand rather than, sort of the eggs and issues follow-up that happens because as a classroom teacher you don't see the operation. So I really felt that once I knew who the opposition was to be, that I felt very confident that I could do at least the same type of job as he, if not better, and felt that I had that experience with the legislature that he didn't have.
Now, I think I sort of interrupted you, but you were telling about your grassroots type campaign. Was it a door-to-door type campaign, and who were your workers, and how did you?
Yes, very much.
Recruit?
Many of my campaign workers, in fact, we were meeting weekly for a number of months in trying to attract and convince a candidate to run for that position because our senator was going to retire. So we knew the seat was coming open. And there were a good cross-section of people from this county who would meet on a regular basis. And I remember once my husband and I made the decision that I was going to run, I announced it to these people who were my friends, and everyone just sat there in silence. And I thought, maybe I should rethink this. But there were many people who were absolutely convinced that that seat could not be kept by the Republicans because of the very strong showing this other gentleman had evidenced, and he was back. And his opponent wasn't anywhere around. It was a brand new open seat. And as I talked to some of them later, they said that it was just a sense of shock, and a few of them felt sorry for me because they felt like it was just going to be an uphill battle, and that's when they resolved to help even more. So much of the help came from the people that I had worked with in Republican politics. A lot came from my church, and many from personal friends. But it was, in fact, Common Cause, which deals a lot with ethics and campaign ethics and so on, interviewed me last year because in the Senate, again, not only the only person who filed by petition, but I also had the highest percentage of contributions from within my district versus political action committees. And they wanted to know how that was done. And I had read that the hardest task for a woman candidate is to ask people for money. And so I made a resolve that that would not be my stumbling point. It was a very expensive race, one of the top 10 in the state that year of 165.
My goodness.
Between the two of us, more than $115,000 was spent for the seat. So we had to raise a great deal of money.
How did you do it? You just asked people, or how?
Well, I had a couple of fundraisers. We started out, with the exception of one, all of my fundraisers were geared toward family. We always indicated that children were the guests and that the parents would be the ones who paid. Little $10, $15 ice cream socials, a chili supper that people at my church helped coordinate. Senator Kassebaum came back. Jan Myers had a great deal of help from other women that came into Riley County that were in the legislature, and they did a blitz for me in Aggieville. Senator Dole came back. The Republicans came through, again, because it was an open seat, and they knew the history of how close it had been before, on that in that race and trying to keep that seat. In addition, I did some direct mail and put 2 women in charge of my fundraising.
Well, did you have a vigorous campaign? Was it
It was very intense.
Was it?
And partly because my opponent and I are the same age. We had 1 letter difference in our last names. We moved to town the same week. He was an attorney and my husband's an attorney, so they knew each other through that. Both of us were, active in the parent-teacher organization for our kids, and so it was we lived 2 blocks from one another. He's precinct committee man for the Democrats. I was the one for the Republicans. So there were a lot of things, that overlapped, and I would say that it was not only vigorous, but for the most part we were able to keep it pretty positive by today's standards.
Well, that helps. Did your husband, you mentioned him when you were talking about making your announcement, did he encourage you to run and help you through the campaign, or what was his role?
Well, at times through the years, he's felt that the volunteer efforts are a way of people using people, and that all the hours that I was putting in, what was that going to, quote, get me? And I explained that you derive your pleasure as you do things, not always looking to see what else is going to happen down the pike. But because of that, that decision in looking to the consideration for running for the Senate, he was surprised, first of all, that I would consider it. Secondly, he was happy that I would. It was pretty emotional. Yeah, because of the kids and stuff too. But since I had a job in Topeka and I was commuting every day anyway, our lifestyle had changed a bit. He had more responsibility with the kids and with the home and that type of thing. So that part wasn't going to change. Whereas a year before that, with me teaching and being home at 4 o'clock every day, it would have been a definite change from what it was in working in Topeka. So we'd already made part of our change the year before.
Well, you say you financed your campaign through donations mostly from within the district. Was there any a large outpouring from any particular occupational group or women's group or voters group, or was it a partisan thing where Republicans were?
No, not really. I would say in looking at contributions, most of them came from a wide variety of people. However, my treasurer had been a treasurer for a couple of statewide candidates in the past, and I purposely asked a number of people, who should I have for treasurer? If you were to pick the most honest person in Rider County, who would it be? Well, when 3 people said the same person, I went to that person and met him. Had never even met the man. And within a couple of hours, he had committed that he would be my treasurer. And I remember he making a few comments later in the campaign that he had never noticed or had never seen so many women's names being listed in giving in writing the campaign checks. So, and there were a lot of families that we knew, but the woman was the one who either writes the checks generally or made that decision to contribute. Not big checks, but you know, for Senate races, $25, some $50.
And that was mainly how you financed it then? Was through the
Yeah, we had more than 500 individual contributors, which is a big number for a statewide race.
Yeah. Well, let's see, you had a couple of newspapers in your district and probably some smaller ones. How did the media treat you overall?
Media was pretty good. The supposed politics of the 2 major papers, which would be the Junction City paper and the Manhattan paper. The Manhattan paper has a reputation by some of being a Republican paper, and the Junction City paper has a reputation of being Democrat. And I would say that I received equal treatment from both. And that still continues. In fact, if I were to put one as far as their coverage of me over another, the Junction City paper covers more of what I do than the Manhattan paper. But as the editor of the Junction City paper called me the day after the election, he said, "You knew where I would be on this. You knew who I would endorse, but you are the senator. And for 4 years I'll work with you, and when you're up for election again, you know where I'll be." And they've been very fair in that respect.
So you knew what to expect.
Yeah. The other paper that is a local paper is in Rider County, and a woman editor there, and she was very easy to work with. And as far as advertising and that kind of thing, it's pretty well split between the 2 major ones. A few things.
So the media really didn't play any.
Well, I did
strong part.
Yeah, I feel like the media did make a
Oh.
difference in my campaign, and that was television media.
I see.
I decided early on that I was going to buy time on WIBW out of Topeka, and was the only person outside the Topeka area that used that. But it goes into Manhattan and Junction City, and a couple of Democrats following the campaign said that they felt that was the turning point. Because
Your opponent didn't?
No. We bought local cable time, both of us did. But I bought time before the primary and let people know that I was going to be doing the door-to-door, because my strategy was to get the Republican vote in the primary, for them to invest then and stay with me through November. Because I had seen 4 years before many people had voted their town and not their party. So that was part of our strategy. And I also did my work with some other women who were running for office, and we did all of our filming in the Senate chamber. And we're able to share those costs of location costs, because it costs a lot to get started. You know, have WIBW go to the Capitol. So, and we looked like we belonged there, even though we hadn't been elected.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Good idea.
So that's where I do think media did make a difference.
Has anyone in your family been in the legislature, either here or in another state?
No. My dad's father, from Northeast, they lived in Northeast Missouri, and he used to run for county tax assessor, and that would be a political office, and he was a Democrat, and ran a number of times, but that's really the only one. However, my mother, through the years, as I was growing up in Topeka, she worked for the legislature during the session, so I was, aware of that, and in fact, a number of people that she worked for were still there, and when I was elected, and so it was a real treat for her to.
Does she still work there?
No, no, she's works for the state. She's chief of licensing for ABC.
I see.
But I will, soon after I was sworn in, well, a number of people, the day that we were sworn in, about 100 people from Manhattan went down for the swearing-in ceremony. My mom and dad had a reception and stuff afterwards for a lot of my volunteer workers. And people in the legislature saw my mother there the day of the swearing in, and they said, "What are you doing here, Fran?" Well, my daughter's a senator. And they'd never gotten the connection because the names aren't the same.
That's interesting.
And we were at a party a couple of weeks after the session started. There was a dance, and you go into this room, and I had gone with my mother, and someone whisked her away the dance floor, and when she was brought back, my mom said, "Well, I'd like for you to meet my daughter," and she was dancing with Senator Feliciano, and he looked all around to meet me, and I said, "Here I am." And he said, "Well, shoot, I knew I liked her even though she was a Republican. Now I know why." But Mom had been a secretary to him, and Dan Thiessen, and Jim Francisco.
Oh my goodness.
So I had that fringe. However, when she did most of that, I was in college, and I really wasn't down at the Capitol with her, but I think that may have had some influence. I was always involved in student government kinds of things.
Oh, that's an interesting tie-in. All right, your district hasn't changed since you were elected, since it's just been 2 years. How would you describe your district, besides the fact that you have K-State and all the student body and Fort Riley?
I really believe that there may be some other districts like it. Everyone believes their district to be, unique. But to me, it truly is a microcosm of Kansas. There are two good-sized towns that have more in common than they would ever admit. There are some smaller communities. I have rural, a major military installation, and a state university. And that's basically Kansas. So it's a district that is very, very dependent upon outside dollars, whether it be state dollars coming in for Kansas State University or whether it be Fed dollars for Fort Riley. And when you have those strings, that umbilical cord attached to somewhere outside your own district, you find it to be a very time-demanding position. I have good friends in the legislature whose job is to go to Topeka and make sure that Topeka leaves them alone. And my job is to go to Topeka and make sure Topeka notices this. And the same with the Fed level. There's a lot of action with the fort, and particularly right now with Operation Desert Shield and our deployment.
Well, besides these issues, what other issues, besides the issues connected with finances and that type of thing, what other issues do you think this district is
Well,
concerned
again,
with?
the diversity of populations within it, I think, caused a variety of issues to surface. There's a very high degree of education. Everybody runs around with a couple of degrees, it seems, particularly in the Manhattan area, and part of that with the access to Kansas State University for continuing education, the vocational technical school. But because of that, people travel quite a bit, or people who have lived in other parts of the country come here, and they will see that something is maybe not the same, or they would like to see Kansas improve in this area. So there's always lots of ideas coming up as to what they think should be changed. High level of concern for the agricultural community, partly stemming from the fact of K-State and the extension, how that figures out. Also a very high concern for environmental issues to be addressed, not only statewide but in a global perspective. We also have, I have a section within the district that is very low socioeconomic conditions. So we have both, going. Junction City is an area that has a very high percentage of minorities, and usually you find that in very urban settings.
Yes.
But so it has its trials as well. A very strong focus on public education with a high concentration of people who feel that higher education is important, public education is important, but what are we going to do about our taxes? We're going to be able to cut those and do it all. And that's pretty I think symbolic of the entire state right now. No one wants their service cut, but they don't want to see the funds increased.
Taxes are a big issue this year. During your campaign, did you focus on any issues like these, or did you have debates with your opponent on the issues?
There were a couple of issues that we varied on. Most items, it seemed as though we were very similar. However, my opponent really tried to push that somehow I would be a yes person to the governor, and that he would not. And this went on for, 6-8 weeks, that I would not be able to stand on my own. And when it came to, one example was the Washburn University question, and I indicated that I would not be able to support Washburn coming into the system until we had completed the margin. And many times he would publicly say, well, but she'll get down there and the governor will convince her otherwise. And so finally I decided that I would explain in as big a public meeting and with media present that in my profession, which is education, a person's word is good. And if in his profession of lawyering, he might look at it differently. And I know that it was not the nicest thing to say, but it stopped the comments from his side. And that there were a number of people who felt that that kind of notion that he was playing also was a bit sexist, and that women maybe could have their minds changed, but men couldn't. So we were able to deal with that. I could have dealt with it earlier, but not as big, so we waited.
Interesting approach.
Yeah, we had a difference too on the death penalty. and that was I used to my advantage, particularly in the Gary County area, Junction City area, the tough stand on crime, and his was a little different than mine. And he was against the death penalty, and I was for it. So we had some differences, but for the most part, it was a matter of who could do the job. And I stressed my experience in working with the legislature.
Yeah, that sounds like you were very successful doing it too. How would you, if you had to characterize your stance on some of these issues, now you've named a few, but how would you characterize yourself just in general? Are you a liberal or conservative or down the middle in some respect?
I would probably characterize myself as a moderate. And I'm comfortable with that situation because coming from the party perspective, I mean, there are many people who have nothing to do with the party and then have to fit in afterwards. And I've been able to fit in the way I was with the party to start. And I think that's an advantage. I don't agree with everyone that is right-wing or left-wing or, I mean, I think that there's a lot of reasoning that goes into situations. However, I strongly believe in the two-party system. And people who are unaffiliated, and I used to be one too, I think that they're missing the boat on how to really identify and make government work and be accountable.
Well, now there are sometimes issues that people label as women's issues. How do you characterize yourself, or how do you fit into those issues?
Well,
or are you mostly concerned with women's issues?
Well, I'm not real certain what the women's issues are. I guess I use the word family issues some, and family can be, with kids or without kids and so on, but I don't know what the men's issues are. I mean, if there's women's issues, then what are the men's? I think employment covers a spectrum, education. I just don't see anything that's, if there's one issue that many people term as a women's issue, it's on abortion. And if people want to talk about that issue and refer to it as a women's issue, I guess they can, but I also see that as a bigger scope because there's a man and a woman that deal, with abortion. So I don't use the term women's issues.
Yeah. That's interesting. As a freshman legislator a couple of years ago, did you have a mentor or someone that kind of helped you out and made recommendations to you? Or?
Well, I think what's really nice about the Senate is that I almost would parallel it to a classroom. You're going to always be learning in that environment. There are going to be some people that you get along better with than others, but you're old enough to not form cliques or to try to avoid them. And because you work with everyone, for the most part, sometime during the day with all these committees that we're on, you really know one another. So there's a lot of camaraderie, I think, in the Senate, more so than the House. The House, you could be there for 6 years and never work with some people because it's always changing. But here you're tied in for 4 years, so you better get along. As far as a mentor, I see a kind of camaraderie with people who were elected at the same time. 10 of 40 in the Senate when I was elected. We are the freshman class. So we had a fairly sizable, 25% brand new. And 6 Democrat and 4 Republican. So we don't really call ourselves a freshman class, but when we didn't know the answer to something, it wasn't one person going to a senior senator, but several would go at the same time. And I have always been one who was not afraid to ask for help. So I can't say anyone was assigned to me. I felt like I had a great deal of support during the campaign from the man who I was to replace Senator Wirtz, and he had such respect in the Senate that when I got there, I already had some credibility because he had occupied the seat before. So that was a plus for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. What committees do you serve?
Well, after the election win, that campaign was over, and so then you start your next campaign, which is to campaign for your assignments. And I didn't know at the time that I was campaigning for assignments for 4 years. I thought maybe we switched around every year, but you have your assignments for 4 years. And I felt that assessment and taxation with reappraisal and classification was going to be a very visible and very influential committee. I also would like to have had stronger consideration for ways and means, but freshmen are very seldom selected for that. So I pushed that, and then with leadership, and then my fallback position, should they not be able to grant that, was tax. And so I was assigned to tax and judiciary, and was the only freshman legislator who was assigned to chair a committee, which was governmental organization, and my background in working for the state, I think, was helpful in that. I am vice chairman of the confirmations committee, which again is a very interesting committee in that you really get to meet the players and know who's helping to form policy in the state. And this year it should really be enlightening because there'll be so many new appointments. Also, labor, industry, and small business, I'm vice chairman of that, and the people that I worked for in state government, it was the arm of labor, Department of Human Resources. So I had a lot of background as far as JTPA programs and all of the federal lingo. I knew all of that and had worked with Senator Salisbury before in other capacities, so that worked well. And then economic development, I think, is going to be happening with research and development through Regents Institutes. So I pushed hard to get on that. And then I've had a couple of other appointments since then, one by the governor and one by the president of the Senate for commissions.
A lot of committees, isn't it?
It really is. My first committee, when the session is on, starts at 8, and I have one break between 8 and 4 o'clock. So, and that's at 9 to see who is there. That's another interesting aspect on demands of time during the legislative session. Again, it's going to vary as to where you're from in the state, but we are only 1 hour from Topeka and have I-70, and a lot of people who have jobs, they can take time off to come on down to the Capitol to see us. So I have constituents there all the time. And then with extension, which is across the state of Kansas, and representing K-State, there's demands there for the evenings and and the different receptions. But any place that I go, there are going to be people from home. Whereas people who live far away don't see their constituents unless they go home to see them.
Excuse me, there's a gentleman here to see you. He said he had an appointment.
What's his name, Warren?
Parker?
Yeah. He's with Farm Bureau. Tell him I'll be just a little bit.
Okay.
Let's get this right along here. Can you think of anything that's been a major victory or major defeat or something that you really remember being involved in the legislature?
Well, there were 2 items. One each year, I guess. The first one dealt with a commitment to a campaign promise that I had made, and again, it regarded Washburn and the affiliation. And when the bill came out of committee, Washburn was to be associated with the Board of Regents and full funding for the margin, and none of the senior senators would cross the governor on that. And so it was up to the freshmen to bring the amendment forward to take Washburn out, which again was a little tough because I attended Washburn. My husband's a graduate of Washburn, but I had made a commitment to people in Manhattan that until year 3 was there, we were not going to have that consideration. So my seatmate and I led that campaign and were able to amend the bill, and it took some effort as a native Topeka and to rebuild those fences with the Topeka delegation, which it's okay now. This last year I had a bill that was out of my committee that regarded some auctioneers, and I knew that I was in the minority, and went into a debate situation of nearly an hour on the bill with Senator Gaines, knowing that I was probably not going. I knew I had 2 votes going in, and I knew he had the majority. But when he suggested killing the bill procedurally, I prevailed upon him to let the system work. We did debate it, and I only lost by 4 votes. So, but we were able to procedurally bring that bill forward and have it discussed as it should have been. So I didn't consider that necessarily a loss as much as being able to indicate that legislation should be considered.
Well, have you introduced any legislation particularly? Or?
Yes, and been a part of some that dealt primarily with the margin of excellence. This year I have a number of bills that I'm pretty excited about. One of them is a new concept. I'm referring to it as Learn Fair, but it will deal with AFDC recipients. It's a controversial issue, and I don't know how well it'll fare this year, but I want to bring it out. And it refers to children whose parents are on welfare. And if the children do not meet the attendance requirements of the school, the payments will stop. And the reason I'm not trying to punish children as much as send the signal, and as a teacher I see that there's a direct correlation between success in school and attendance. And that the investment of public dollars in people is to help them so that they can get an education, which is free. And so we'll see how that bill goes.
That's interesting.
I think that'll be it's a new concept, and we'll see what happens. Some of the others deal with, well, I think one that's rather important. We do not have any kind of inspections now on automobiles, and I think there are many unsafe ones on the road. So I have a bill that's going to be dealing with that, and one with the coating of plastics for recycling, which is from one of my commission and environmental issues. So pretty well cover the gamut, I guess, of traffic and environment and children and education. And
pretty broad there.
Many legislators will tend to major in something, or they become an expert, and that's what they tell you should do. I guess I'm still in the undecided category that everything is of interest, and with the variety of committees that I have, I feel like I've got different things that will fit, and the interests aren't tunneled.
That's good. Now, you mentioned that you had participated in, at least gone to some of the meetings of the Women's Coalition or the Women's Caucus, I guess, last year. I don't know if that was real or whether the press just called it that, but did you participate in that?
Okay. Well, because of some issues that dealt with the funding for children, Republican women and Democrats on the House side formed a group. I think they were called Steel Magnolias was their name in the House side.
Okay.
And we didn't really have that kind of a counterpart thing, on the Senate side. But a couple of women legislators, Republican and Democrat, had an open house at one of the houses that they rent. And we went over for sandwiches and stuff. I don't know if they meant more than that or not. I do know one of the lobbying groups hosted a dinner for women legislators and women that were in positions in state government. I didn't attend that. I think I come home some during the session too. But there is not a formal group that I'm aware of. And I particularly know, speaking from the Senate side, that there's not a women's group where the 9 of us are unified in some way.
I think some people feel like there's more of a unified effort there, and others don't, so it's interesting. Now, I'm going to start asking you a few real quick questions about your private life and where you grew up and so forth, just to get a little background. Are you a native of Kansas?
No, I was born in Kirksville, Missouri, and moved to
Kansas, yeah. And what was your childhood and growing up like in your education? In Kirksville and your...
I just lived there for a little bit, mainly until junior high. We lived in the Kansas City area, and I was the oldest of 4 children. We're all 6 years apart, so each of us had our shot at being the only child.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, where in Kansas City did you attend?
Lived in North Kansas City, Missouri, and then in 6th grade we moved to Topeka.
And you went to Topeka West, you said?
Started out at Wanamaker, and then we moved into the city limits, and I went to Capper Junior High, and then graduated from Topeka West.
Oh, for Pete's sake. Yeah. Well, did you you went to Washburn? Or you didn't graduate?
No, both my undergraduate and graduate degree are from Emporia State University, but I had... at the end of my sophomore year, I quit college and started working for Santa Fe. And after a summer and semester, decided that I really needed more school. So I quit Santa Fe and went back to school at Emporia, and then lived out in San Francisco for a while, and went to San Francisco State, K-State, taking some classes at Lawrence. So covered most of the schools.
Did you major in education?
Majored in education, and then in 5 years of commuting or living out of the state, so then my master's is in curriculum instruction. And then I've taught mainly in small schools, and in 1985 I was selected Kansas master teacher.
That's right, I remember that. That was quite an
honor. That's when I was at St. George.
Yeah.
First time we'd ever tried for it in that district, so it was kind of
I remember that.
We had another master teacher last year.
Really?
Out there.
Well, what organizations have you belonged to that you felt like might be maybe influential in propelling you into the legislature?
Well, I served as on a negotiating team when I was teaching, and member of Kansas National Education Association, and a little bit surprised that they would not endorse me after being a member 12 years and a master teacher, but they didn't. And I was president of my association. And also political action coordinator. Been active in the League of Women Voters, Kansas Teachers of English. Also have taught speech and drama and belonged to the Speech Communications Association.
Did you
belong to the American Legion?
Okay, any women's federated clubs or anything like that?
Well, American Legion Auxiliary and La Leche League, which is a women's breastfeeding support group, and the League of Women Voters. But I'm not really too much a women's club.
You're more professional type organizations that you belong to. And your occupation before your election was you were a teacher. What did you teach?
Okay, I've taught at one time or another grades 6 through 12. And then the year I was named master teacher, I also, later that year, was named to an endowed chair. So I taught at the universities in education.
Well, that's interesting.
You know, people who were just going out to do their student teaching, and that was real interesting too. But I primarily taught English. I remember as a senior or junior at Emporia State going in to see my advisor, and my plan was to get a degree in political science, BA. And he said, I don't know what you will do with this, Miss Grimsher, unless you go into politics. And I said, well, I'm not doing that. So we
you remember that vividly.
Yes, and so he reminds me of it too. He's still there. And he indicated that since I had very strong grades in English, that maybe I should pick that up as a second and go into education. So I have primarily taught English. I'm going to take a break here.
Yeah, sure.
Check.
Quickly then. How old were your children when you were elected?
See, the kids were 9 and 11.
And how old were you when you were elected?
40.
40. Huh, that's an interesting...
39. No, I was 39. Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yes. Yeah, I'm 41 now, so I was 39.
Okay. Who cared for your children? You went to Topeka and came home some, but you have an apartment down there. Who took care of your children? Were you?
Well, after I announced that I was going to be running, my mother came to town, and the two of us interviewed some people to help care for the kids, because the hours are so crazy when you're doing door-to-door and that kind of thing. And I had a couple of students from K-State that came in. In fact, the one is still with me, and she plugs in January when the session starts, and she's over 3 days a week. And the kids, our kids, are walking distance. The school is 2 blocks from here, and our house is another 2 blocks from here. So everything is here. I've never been the mom in the station wagon. Brooke now goes to the middle school, and it's 4 blocks away. So we're right downtown Manhattan, and yet it's not a city because we're uptown. My husband helps a lot. The kids come here after school and do their homework in the office somewhere, and the secretaries. Everybody just kind of works together when mommy's in Topeka. And then usually every other week they'll come down one night, and we all camp out at the apartment, and then they get up and go back early. So
well, that's a nice, interesting arrangement. Yeah,
and
the most interesting I've heard of. Really. You go back and forth and like what 3? You stay down there 2 or 3 nights? I usually come home either Tuesday or Wednesday night, and then I'm home Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But the people who had the most concern about that were people who are in their 60s and older, and wondered how I could leave my kids. You know, during the campaign that came up quite a bit. In fact, I will never forget the week before the campaign voting, and I was in Milford, Kansas, which is the very northwest part of the district, walking door to door with Speaker Jim Braden. And people started asking me about my children who were 4 and 5 and how could I leave them. And this happened at several doors. And finally I asked them, I said, where did you get this? Well, we've just had phone calls that have come in to tell us that this afternoon. And I said, well, we have children, but they're in 4th and 5th grade. And so we weren't certain how to combat that, but there were a lot of older citizens that lived in Milford. So I went immediately to the radio station, and it was on a Thursday, and the election was, you know, we didn't even miss the Sunday paper to take any kind of ads or anything. And so we went on the radio, my husband and I, and explained about our family, and I carried Milford by the highest percentage. So whatever the plan was to try to bring a feeling that somehow it wasn't going to work for Lana, we were able to dissuade that. That's interesting. I think that's a common tactic. It's probably I'm going to ask you if you were a debater. I think you would have told me by now if you were. Did you debate at all in high school? No. I ran for. I was a class officer in high school, and knew the debaters, but that really wasn't me. And then in student government in Emporia, it was back in the days when you had 3 people per class that represented you. So your student governing association for the university was 12 people, and again, that smaller kind of interaction. And you were one of the elected representatives for your class?
Yeah.
Or all the years you were there? Or?
The years that I ran. I ran 2 years, and then I was out of school. When I came back, they had changed to a student senate, and I ran and served that second semester. But there were like 90, and I didn't like it, so I didn't run again. I like little groups.
Do you think your service in the legislature is changing you, or has changed you, or the way other people see you, or treat you, or talk to you, or anything?
Well, I don't know. I feel like probably the thing that bothers me the most is not being able to remember names as well as I would like. My family thinks I change when the session's on because it's a higher gear and there's a lot more messages to take, and everything gets real hectic. And they say that I tend to demand a little more when the session's on. But they all recognize that, and it seemed like it goes okay. I don't think it really has changed me much. I mean, I still scrub my kitchen floor, and, you know. Wish I could iron while I drove. So, no.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, do you think that it's cost your family anything? I mean, do you feel like they've sacrificed or given up anything? So you...
I think they feel like they're on vacation when I'm in Topeka. I mean, they eat out more, and here's these kids. I mean, both of our kids are 5 foot or taller now. You know, I mean, they're moving right along since Kent and I are tall. But, you know, they'll sleep with their dad, you know, when I'm gone. So it's just, they sort of, you know, bind together, and then I come home and try to wade through the house. My goal is always to get the house in shape before school's out. I usually have a month, and that's how long it takes. But we don't worry about it. So it's pretty relaxed.
It's just a different atmosphere.
Yeah.
Well,
there is a feeling, though. There was a situation this year with one of my daughter's classes and her grades and so on, and she was hesitant for me to really follow through on it because I was a senator. And I explained to her that I was also her mom and a teacher, and that sometimes, and we were able to resolve that. But the kids don't want any special favors. You know, I mean, they're real.
Yeah.
My son had a situation where he lost some papers, and the teacher told him he could make it up, and he didn't, and got a lower grade. When I asked him about it, he says, well, I think she was going to let me do it because you're a senator. So we just took the lower grade. And even though several kids had that same opportunity. So.
Well, is there anything I haven't asked you about that you can think has been important or an important influence in what you've done or what you're going to do?
I think it's important that when people are elected to public service, that they remember, and women have wonderful memories. I mean, I can remember who supported me and who didn't. But the bottom line is, after you win, you work for everybody. And you have to put your partisan politics aside in delivery of services. But I don't think that you have to put your partisan politics aside in what your philosophy is. And there are times that spill over. Again, I'm primarily a person who strongly believes in fiscal responsibility. But as an educator and from a community such as this, I believe in spending dollars on education. So you see some differences there. But I always tell people that are considering public service, whether it be state, county, local, whatever, that you're never going to have everyone support you and be with you. And my dad thinks that 51% is always safe. And it could be, but if you just rule and think you are ruling with a 51% majority, I don't think you're going to have a very fun time. I think you have to continuously broaden what your perspective is and know more and more about your district. More people that you know and the ideas that you hear, whether you can support them at a statewide level or not, is immaterial. It's knowing that people have that comfort zone to share them with you. That's what I strive to try to do.
Real important. Sounds really good.